Nu ska vi presentera Tobias Schmidt Hansen, läkare och författare från Danmark som kommer att föreläsa på engelska.
Hello, and thank you for letting me talk here today. I'm very excited about giving my first talk on a plant-based diet here in Sweden. I'm a doctor and I work in a family practice in Copenhagen, and I am the president of the Danish Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and I'm the co-author of a book called The Plant-Based Diet, or in Swedish, Den växtbaserade kost, which is just came out basically this week, I think. So this talk will be a bit about that book and some of the topics raised in that. So this is the book here. I wrote this with a clinical dietitian for like 3 years ago. After I had graduated medical school and I started working in a hospital, I was quite overwhelmed to see how many people that were suffering from lifestyle-related diseases. And I didn't feel that they had that many places to go to like learn what an optimal diet was and how they could help address some of their health issues. So I teamed up with this clinical dietitian, Maria Felding, and I spent half a year in researching scientific papers on diet and health, and this was the result of that. Okay, so I just want to start by doing some clarification of some terms, because I find that this is often a source of confusion. What I'm going to be talking about today is a plant-based diet, which originates from the concept of a whole food plant-based diet, which is a diet predominantly based on unprocessed vegetable, fruits, whole grains, legume, nuts, and seed. This is not necessarily a vegan diet. There can be small amounts of animal products in a plant-based diet, but it's centered around whole plant foods. What is normally like a source of confusion is that this is not a vegan diet. Vegan just refers to a diet with no animal products. This can be a diet full of junk food and doesn't say much about what a healthy, optimal diet is. All right. Before we dive into it, I think it's very important for me to say that diet is super, super important. What we eat really, really matters for how long we have to live on this earth. When we have like these gigantic analyses about risk factors globally, we're looking at all the different risk factors: alcohol, smoking, drugs, diseases, and we can see that the diet is actually attributes as much to untimely death as smoking, alcohol, drugs, and low physical activity combined. So if we want to like live longer and have fewer diseases, the diet has to be in one of our main focuses. And another important point is we are not our genes. A lot of people think that most of these lifestyle diseases, like type 2 diabetes and heart disease, are manifestations of bad genes. That is very rarely the case. This is a study from Harvard by Walter Willett, who's like the head of the Harvard's nutritional program, or used to be, and he did like this analysis to see how much the genes attribute to the major lifestyle-related diseases. And what he found was that like 70% of colon cancer and stroke, and 80% of coronary heart disease, and 90% of type 2 diabetes could be prevented by a healthy diet. So we have an enormous potential to prevent these diseases, but we're just not doing it. And how do we do that? We should eat an optimal diet, and this is what an optimal diet should do. It should provide adequate intake of nutrients. It should not adversely affect global health. It should aid in the achievement and maintenance of healthy weight. It should contribute to an optimal blood pressure. It should contribute to optimal cholesterol levels. And it should prevent the development of insulin resistance. And it should reduce inflammation, minimize the risk of developing cancer, and aid in the maintenance of a healthy microbiome or gut flora. The reason why these three colors are different is because I'm not going to have the time to dive into those topics today. A 45-minute talk is not enough to cover all these. So this is what I'll be talking about today. But the other subjects will be covered in the book. Yes. when we're talking about nutrients and diet, I think it's a very common theme that we're very afraid of not getting enough of something. We're afraid of not getting enough iron, not getting enough protein, and this is kind of weird because none of the diseases that we're suffering from in the Western world are caused by a lack of something. They're all caused from an excess of something. So it doesn't make sense that we have this great worry about not getting enough of something. What we should be worrying about is what we're getting too much of. And one of the main worries is usually protein. And I won't dive too much into protein, but I just want to say it is usually not a problem on a whole food plant-based diet because all plants have all amino acids and there's no need to combine them. It can be an issue on an unhealthy vegan diet. If you eat junk food, then yes, you can get like protein deficient. But if you center your meals around whole plant foods, it is basically impossible to become protein deficient. Unless you have some kind of chronic illness or have eating disorder or something, but for the general population, it's basically impossible. And on a plant-based dietary pattern, you usually have a high intake of most vitamins and most minerals. I'll come into the ones that can be an issue on the next slide. Iron deficiency is not more common among vegans than it is in the general population. It tends to be sometimes an issue with vegetarians because dairy products have no iron in it whatsoever. So if you're the kind of vegetarian that just eats cheeses and dairy instead of meat all the time, then you might actually become iron deficient. But vegans tend not to be iron deficient. The main supplement that you need to worry about is taking is B12. And you need quite high doses because the absorption from the supplements isn't always that good. So you should either take 250 micrograms daily or 1,000 micrograms every 3 days, or just take 2,500 once a week. It doesn't matter which form it is. D vitamin you should take from October to April because we basically mainly get it from the sun, and Scandinavia is not that lucky when it comes to sun all year round. I see a lot of vegans, they come and they want to have their blood tests, and it's not usually something that you need to do if you're on a whole food plant-based diet. The only thing you need to worry about is taking the B12 and the D vitamin. Other nutrients that you have to think about is calcium. The recommended daily intake both in Denmark and Sweden is 800 milligrams. And it's important there's a buffer here. You don't get weak bones by not eating 800 milligrams a day. WHO say 500 is enough. And we don't see an increased risk of fractures before you get around 400 milligrams a day. So if you don't get 800 every day, no worries. But you should try and aim for it. And the main dietary sources is kale and soy foods, seeds and nuts, different legumes. But fortified foods is also a good idea. So if you eat a plant drink or plant milk, I would definitely recommend buy the ones that have added calcium. Then you're quite certain that you will not become deficient. So the general population, even though if you eat plant-based or vegan, should not take a calcium supplement. If you're old, frail, don't eat enough calories, it might be a good idea. The other mineral is selenium. Is a very important mineral for our antioxidant defenses and for reducing inflammation. We tend not to get enough of it on a plant-based diet because it's usually we get it from animal products. Brazil nuts is a major source of it, but you have to basically eat a few of these every day to get all the selenium that you need. So this might be a good idea to supplement as well on a vegan diet or a plant-based diet. Iodine is also something that we should maybe contemplate supplementing. Most people get the iodine from salt, and we want to reduce our salt intake, so it's not a very good way of getting our iodine. And another major source of iodine in the Western diet is from dairy products, because you put iodine on the udder to prevent infections, and then you get iodine in the dairy products. So vegans tend to have somewhat less iodine in their diet. you can add seaweed, but you also have to basically eat it every day, nori seaweed, to cover your iodine intake. It's hard to do. I try to do it, and I must say I most days fail to do it. So supplementing might also be a good idea when it comes to iodine. ALA is alpha-linolenic acid. It's the omega-3 that you find in flax seeds, chia seeds, walnuts. Just 1 tablespoon of that covers your recommended intake. So it's quite easy to get all the omega-3s you need. Then there's like the talk about that the omega-3 in flax seeds is not as good as the ones you get in fish products, because that's the ones that are called EPA and DHA. Normally we convert APA and EPA from the ALA, so we can get it from the flax seeds, but some people don't have the enzymes necessary to make this conversion. Women tend to do this very well. Young people tend to do this very well. Men, not so much, and when you become older, maybe not so much. So this might be also a good idea to supplement, especially if you're a man and you go past 40 or 50. Then I would probably recommend taking a supplement of EPA, DHA, and especially if you're pregnant, because not having enough of these essential fatty acids can be quite detrimental to the pregnancy. I've put algae as a dietary source to EPA and DHA just because fish do not create omega-3 fatty acids. They're exactly like any other animal. They cannot create it. They get it from algae. So also when we supplement, we can just buy the supplement straight extracted from the algae. We don't have to go through the fish, so to say. When it comes to not adversely affecting the global health, this study just came out a few months ago. It's also by Walter Willett, the same guy who did the analysis about genes. And he kind of concluded that if we want to have a sustainable diet for the future populations and not detrimentally destroy the climate, this is how our plates should look like. And he did, calculated the sustainable intake of red meat per person per day is 14 grams. That's basically nothing. And this is how our protein should look. So mainly legumes, nuts and seeds, and this is what we can eat from animal protein, very, very little. I'll talk a little about obesity, because I think that's one of the reasons most people, they get interested in their diet, is because they want to lose weight. So it's very important to address. And when we look at the Swedish numbers, half of the adult population in Sweden is overweight, which means a BMI over 25. And this is going to be one of my main points today. Having a normal risk factor is not the same as optimal. Because if you're looking at numbers from the World Heart Federation, 58% of type 2 diabetes and 21% of ischemic heart disease can be attributed to the BMI over 21. So an optimal BMI is significantly lower than where we consider a normal BMI. So it's between 18.5 and 21, an optimal BMI. 10 to 20% of all cancers can be attributed to obesity. In the US, obesity is projected to become the #1 risk factor for cancers. It will be more damaging than smoking within the next decade. This is also, obesity is an inflammatory condition, so basically all of our inflammatory diseases is linked to obesity. So how does one lose weight? This is the common approach. Less carbs, more protein. It started with the Atkins diet back in the 80s. That didn't work, and then they tried it's not about just eating less carbohydrates, it's also about adding more fats. That didn't work. Then they were okay, we need to go back to what we ate in the Stone Ages, and we tried the paleo diet. No studies on that showing any benefit for weight loss. Well, we'll try taking it even further, going into a keto state. So really, really suppressing the carbohydrates in diet, so we start producing ketones. That hasn't shown to do much effect either. And this is the new zero-carb carnivore diet. It's 0 grams of carbohydrates and all animal protein. Not much studies on this yet, but I doubt they'll be very good. this is not very evidence-based, because if we actually look at the studies, we can look at the Predimed study, which is one of the largest clinical trials on diet in Europe. And what they found in their analysis is, for each gram of carbohydrate replaced with animal protein, there was observed a significant increase in weight and all-cause mortality. So the more animal protein and the less carb you ate, the bigger you got and the more sick you got. The other big dietary study in Europe is called the ABACUS Study. More than 300,000 people were followed for 5 years. And what they found is that the ones eating lots of red meat, poultry and processed meat had more weight gain than those who did not eat these products. And these low-carb diets, when you look at all the analysis that have come out on low-carb diets, what we can see is that they're significantly associated with a higher risk of all-cause mortality. So if you go on a low-carb diet, your risk of type 2 diabetes goes up, your risk of cancer, your risk of heart disease also goes up. So this is, not only do they not work, they tend to make you quite sick. So how come they're so popular, one could ask? It's because they work very well the first week you do it. Because we tend to store a lot of water with our carbohydrates in the body. The glycogen depots, they bind a lot of water. So if you go on a low-carb diet, you tend to lose 2 to 3 kilos within a few couple of days, but it's water, it's not fat. And that makes people think this is a great diet and I'll stick to it. But it doesn't last, and it doesn't actually mean less body fat. Okay, so if you ask someone like who actually knows how to address this in an evidence-based way, we can look at what the World Cancer Research Foundation recommends, and their strategies is eat mostly plant-based foods, which are low in energy density, and be physically active. Okay, so the main thing that we know about foods and weight is a focus on energy density is vital. Energy density just means how many calories is there per gram of any given foods. Because we tend to eat the same amount of foods every day. If you weighed the food you ate today with the food you ate the following day and the following day, it's basically the same. So how many calories we get is basically just how many there is per grams of the foods we eat. If we illustrate this is how it looks, right? So this is 400 calories of vegetables, completely fills up the stomach. It'll make you feel full. 400 calories of beef, it has no water in it. It has no dietary fiber, which kind of bulks up and like adds weight. It doesn't fill you up as nearly as much as the vegetables. And the added oils is even worse, right? Most people, they think, okay, now I'll have like a meal that's really good for my weight loss program, and they'll buy a salad and then they'll pour olive oil on top, and they will easily have ending up with a meal that's like 800 worth of calories just because they put oils on it. You have to reduce both the oils and the other energy dense foods. Cheese, eggs, greasy foods like chips, fries will also be in this category. So if you look at like the randomized clinical trials where you put people on different dietary approaches to see how their weight goes, you tend to see the more plant-based you eat, the more weight loss. This is the vegans, the weight loss here, and the vegetarians. The more plants in the diet, the better the weight loss. Okay, blood pressure. This is the most important risk factor there is for living a long life. It is the leading cause of death in the world. 10.4 million every year die of high blood pressure. And it's defined as above 140 milligrams of quicksilver systolic or 90 diastolic. This is when the heart relaxes, this is when it pumps. 20% of the Swedish population have high blood pressure. And again, a huge difference between what is considered normal and what's considered optimal. According to the WHO, optimal systolic blood pressure is below 115. You basically don't see anyone living in Scandinavia or in the Western Europe who has an optimal blood pressure when they go past 30. It is so rare that like if you come to a hospital with optimal blood pressure, like they'll think you're having a shock, basically. That's how rare it is. 2/3 of all strokes and half of all ischemic heart disease is due to systolic blood pressure above 115. Eating vegan or vegetarian is probably one of the best things you can do of reducing your risk of hypertension, having high blood pressure. When we look at the big studies, like we can see that going vegetarian will halve your risk. And if you go vegan, your risk goes down by 75%. This is probably the best study there is to see the health benefits of plant-based eating. It's called the Abacus Study. This is a group of people in California who have a special belief that they should really take care of their body, and they see the scriptures as they should eat no meat or eat vegan. So there's a large population of them that eats either vegetarian, vegan, or meat, but they have basically no smoking. They all exercise. They don't drink alcohol. So there's not much else that like clutters the research. We can just narrow in what is the effects of eating meats or dairy products. So this is very, very high evidence that reducing meat and animal products really, really benefits your blood pressure. Salt is another thing that we have to address when we talk about blood pressure. This is the average intake of salt among young men in Sweden, around 12 grams of salt, and 3 grams is the optimal. 5 grams is considered normal. This creates a difference in systolic blood pressure around 16 points, which is a lot. This is something that will more than like increase your risk of stroke by 50%. So no salt, less meat, and you should consider maybe adding some flax seeds to your diet if you have a high blood pressure. This is a randomized clinical trial where you get people muffins with or without grounded flaxseed, and you can see that their blood pressure goes down by 15 points just from eating the flax. This is around 3 tablespoons of flax seeds, which can be a lot. I would recommend if you have a high blood pressure, you probably start by just adding 1 and then see how that goes. And 1 tablespoon was also all the omega-3s you needed for the entire day, just 1 tablespoon of flax seeds. This is how much that would benefit you. Like just getting your blood pressure down by 10 points will reduce your risk of stroke by 36% and heart attacks by 27%. Most of the drugs that you get from the doctor and that lowers your blood pressure lowers it only by 5 points. Right? So the flax seeds are 3 times more effective. Right? And reducing the salt intake was also 3 times more effective. Like, so the lifestyle choices we make are extremely, extremely powerful. Some of the other remedies you can do for your blood pressure is eat more of the green leafy vegetables and beets, because they have a compound in it called nitrate, and the nitrate is needed for your arteries to produce a substance that makes your arteries relax. This is also what's basically in Viagra, and like the nitroglycerin you can take to like get your heart to relax. You can also get that from foods. Green leafy vegetables. Blueberries also tend to lower your blood pressure quite significantly, just 1 serving, 6 points. The chia seeds also has a tendency to do it, not as much as the flaxseed, but 9 points. Hibiscus tea can also be quite beneficial for high blood pressure. A fun fact about these blueberries, right? If you eat them with dairy products, they won't have any effect whatsoever on your blood pressure, because the whey protein in dairy tends to bind a lot of the phytochemicals that give the plants their healthy attributes. So we have done these studies quite a lot, and there's no effect if you eat dairy at the same time. Cholesterol. This is the main risk factor for atherosclerosis, which is one of the leading killers in the Western world. And again, we have a lot of people who have elevated cholesterol. Half of the hospital settings and we gave them like the exact measured meals for like every single day, where we've had different like levels of saturated fats in them, and we could see that for each gram of saturated fats we added to their diet, their cholesterol went up. So this is like the most accurate science you can do on this, and they show a very, very clear correlation between saturated fat and cholesterol. I couldn't find any numbers on the average intake of saturated fat in Sweden, but the average intake in Denmark is 39 grams, and we're not supposed to get more than 12. So 3 times as much in Denmark, and maybe it's the same in Sweden, I can only guess. The main sources of that is dairy. It's mainly cheeses, cream, butter, but also red meat has a significant amount. And tropical oils, that's coconut oils, palm oils, tend to have a lot of saturated fats as well. So this is the main focus for getting your cholesterol down, less saturated fat. This is what you need to get less of, this is what you need to get more of, dietary fiber. The more dietary fiber you have in your gut, the more excess cholesterol you can absorb and you can excrete. This is a graph showing how much fiber intake correlates to the risk of getting cardiovascular disease. And you see, the more you eat, the less the risk. This is a normal diet, around 20 grams of fiber per day. But it's possible to go all the way down here. This is like a plant-based diet. We tend to have 60 to 70 grams of dietary fiber a day. And like if you just try to like make this more practical, like 1 serving of whole grain pasta has 7 grams of dietary fiber. That leads to a decrease in risk of cardiovascular disease by 11%. This is probably more than taking a cholesterol lowering drug, just 1 portion of a whole grain food. What about eggs? I've got to change that language here. There's a lot of confusion about eggs. And I tend to see that even also with doctors and clinical dietitians. This study here is from the Danish doctors' weekly journal, that eggs do not increase the risk of cardiovascular disease and can be eaten as a part of a heart-friendly diet. I'm always curious when I see studies like this, who funded them, and it was of course the Danish Agriculture and Food Council that funded it. The egg industry has been very, very aggressive over the last 10 years to make eggs seem less harmful. And they've done a lot of studies showing that eggs don't increase cholesterol. And that's also true for the general population. If you take someone eating a normal Western diet in Sweden or Denmark and you add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 eggs to their diet, it doesn't change their cholesterol a single bit. Because it's the first 100 milligrams of dietary cholesterol you get from your diet that has an impact on your own serum cholesterol. So if you're already getting cholesterol from dairy, from meat, from the rest of your diet, it does not have any effect of just adding a little more cholesterol. It's a difference between smoking 20 cigarettes and 22 cigarettes. Like there's no measurable difference, but that doesn't mean that it's not harmful. So most people, they don't get a higher cholesterol from eating eggs, but if you're eating a vegetarian diet or a plant-based diet or a diet which is naturally low in cholesterol, you definitely see a very, very substantial increase in your cholesterol from eating eggs. This is a randomized clinical controlled trial where people were given bread with or without eggs, and they didn't know what kind of, if they had the egg in their diet or not. And you could see that the ones getting the egg in the bread had a significantly higher cholesterol. So if you're eating a healthy diet, eggs, they definitely make it worse, but if you're eating an unhealthy diet, it probably doesn't do much difference. Potential remedies if you're having high cholesterol and you're already eating a pretty good plant-based diet, try to get your fiber content even higher. A good way of doing that is eating more legumes. The flax seeds also reduce cholesterol. It does by around 15% if you eat the grounded 30 grams. I'm very fond of this thing called amla. It's like Indian gooseberry. It's like an Indian berry. It's like it has the highest antioxidant capacity of any foods, and it's very effective in in reducing cholesterol. It works almost as good as the standard cholesterol-lowering medications. A quick note about the ground flaxseed. You don't need to grind it every single day. Just have a coffee grinder, make a big portion, and then just add it onto your oats in the morning or something or your smoothies. You can make a great portion that will last you a month. It's super cheap, super easy. This is the effect of a plant-based diet for heart disease. This is a study by Kallade, where he put people who had very, very, very severe heart disease. They could basically not walk more than a few hundred feet, and he put them on a low-fat, whole food plant-based diet. And this is one of their coronary arteries. This is before the plant-based diet. Basically, no blood flow. Come here after 32 months, completely restored. And this has also been done in randomized clinical trials by a doctor called Dean Ornish. This is the main argument for a plant-based diet, because this is the #1 killer in the Western world, and nothing has this impact on it. No medical drugs, no surgery. The only thing that seems to create these quite miraculous responses is a whole food plant-based diet. This led the president of the American College of Cardiology in 2015 to say the statement: there are two kinds of cardiologists, vegans and those who haven't read the data. Insulin resistance. This is also one of the great lifestyle diseases. Around roughly 500,000 people in Sweden have type 2 diabetes. Another 150,000 are unaware that they have it. But almost 10% of the Swedish population have pre-diabetes, which means that they will most likely develop type 2 diabetes at some point. And this is also very important to address the ones who have pre-diabetes, because you're already in risks of getting heart disease and cancer if you're in the pre-diabetic state. Your risk of cancer goes up almost by 87%, just being in having the pre-diabetic state. So when you have your blood work done, be very sure to make sure that your long-term blood sugar is less than 39. Because if it's between 39 and 47, you're in this pre-diabetic state. And what I see, especially in Denmark, I don't know if this is the case in Sweden, that most doctors, they don't really address this. Because the number doesn't turn red on the screen. It only turns red when it goes into the actual diabetic state. So most people who come and have pre-diabetic are just told, congratulations, you don't have type 2 diabetes. But this is where you need to really have the lifestyle changes. Because if you're in the diabetic state, it's quite hard to get completely out of it by doing dietary changes. But it's very easy if you're in the pre-diabetic state to do something substantial about it. One of the main things you have to do is you have to reduce your fat intake. Type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance is a fatty disease. It comes from the fat we eat, and it comes from the fat that we wear. So it kind of goes into the fat in the bloodstream. It kind of clogs the receptors for the insulin, so it doesn't work. And that's what makes it impossible for the sugar to go from the bloodstream into the muscle and the liver cells where it needs to go. So this is not a disease that comes from eating too much sugar. It's come from eating way, way too much fat and eating a diet that's inflammatory. So this also makes sense. What is one of the most fatty foods and one of the most inflammatory foods there is? It is processed meat. And also when you look at the big analysis on dietary patterns and seeing how many people develop this disease, you can see just 50 grams of processed meat raises your risk about 51%. This is your normal intake in both Denmark and Sweden for processed meat. Red meat also increases the risk, but not as much. It's mostly the processed meat. And if you look at the Abacus Study, which I talked about before, you could see the different dietary patterns and the risk of developing diseases. You can see that the risk of developing type 2 diabetes is half when you eat a vegetarian or vegan diet as it is from eating a diet which has meats in it. It's also very, very effective if you already have type 2 diabetes to go on a plant-based diet. Like a couple of years ago, the Canadian Diabetes Association started recommending a plant-based diet in the treatment of type 2 diabetes. So this is also very effective for this disease as it is for the heart disease. If you're still having problems with insulin resistance on a plant-based diet, the most important thing is trying to reach an optimal weight. Focus on the anti-inflammatory foods. And the anti-inflammatory foods are the ones who have a lot of color in them. It's not the vitamins and the minerals in foods that tends to lower inflammation. It's the colors. So when you're choosing your foods, like in the grocery, choose the ones with strong colors, like take kiwis or berries and mangoes instead of apples and bananas. Choose red onions instead of white onions, like sweet potatoes instead of normal potatoes. The more colors you get in your diet, the more anti-inflammatory it gets. This is way more important than eating more omega-3s. Also, turmeric seems to be quite effective in treating insulin resistance because it's very, very anti-inflammatory. There's like clinical trials where you saw people who had like this pre-diabetic state, and you gave them half of them turmeric and the other half a placebo. 67% of the ones who got the placebo developed type 2 diabetes. 0% of the ones who had turmeric went to actually develop the type 2 diabetes. Flax seeds, again, lower insulin resistance quite significantly. The almond does the same as well. And this is also a thing where exercise really, really does a huge difference. It's less important for exercise when we talk about cholesterol and blood pressure, but for insulin resistance, it's very, very important. Okay, this was a very quick run through. Okay, but any questions? Yes?
I think the recommendation in Sweden is not to eat ground flax seeds because of the cyanide.
Yes, and that's quite specific for Sweden to have this very. You worry a lot about the cyanide in flaxseed. In Denmark, we don't have the same recommendations. And all I can say is that there's been like these studies where you give people 10, 20, 30, 50, 60, up to 100 grams of ground flaxseed, and you measure their cyanide levels in the bloodstream, and there was basically no elevation whatsoever from eating the 30 grams. It started at more like the 60 grams a day. So I'm personally, I am not worried about the cyanide. I would be more worried about the cadmium intake of it. And that's usually why it's like a heavy metal, which also is in flax. That's why I always tend to start with try just eating 1 tablespoon a day to see how that affects your blood pressure. And I think everyone should have 1 tablespoon a day because it's so effective in addressing a lot of these risk factors we talked about today. But for the general population, I wouldn't say more than 1 is probably recommended. But if you have high blood pressure and want to try and treat it, you can go up to 2 or 3.
And it has to be grounded.
It has to be grounded, yeah. Otherwise, it just comes out of the same way as it came in. Yeah. The same goes for chia seeds as well. Like if you eat chia seeds and it isn't grinded, you do not absorb any vitamins, any minerals, any omega-3s. It has to be grinded. Yes.
Do you like soap in water?
It doesn't work, I'm afraid. No. Yeah. It has to be grinded. Yeah.
Another question about flaxseed. Is it any difference if you buy them grounded, or do you have to ground them yourself in the blender?
It's no difference,
okay.
But it's significantly cheaper to grind them yourself.
Yeah.
And people were worried that the omega-3s in them would go bad, but you've actually done studies now that looked at the grinded flaxseed after a week, after a month, after 6 months, and there's no the integrity of the omega-3s were completely intact after 6 months. As long as an airtight container is fine.
Yeah, and another question about flax seeds.
Yeah.
If you make sprouts,
Yeah.
from them, is it like eating them grounded, or is it like?
I don't know. I don't think the study has been made.
Okay.
But usually, sprouting tends to makes different compounds more easily absorbable.
Yeah.
So I can imagine it had quite beneficial attributes to sprouting them. But I don't know if the studies haven't been made. As far
But
as I know.
the cyanide shouldn't be more.
No, it should
from growth.
no.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, maybe yeah.
I was thinking about the turmeric. Do you have to eat it with black pepper, or is it fine to eat it just the way it is?
I would say this it's fine to eat it the way it is. Like it's true, like this compound in pepper called piperine, which like increases the absorption of some of the beneficial compounds in turmeric by up to 2,000%. But it's not necessarily a good thing, because the way the turmeric kind of reduces inflammation is the same way that like exercise reduces inflammation. When you exercise, it's actually like quite inflammatory for the body to do strenuous exercise. But because you get this like momentary burst of inflammation in the body, your body tends to like increase different biochemical pathways that are anti-inflammatory. The same goes with the turmeric. It's actually an irritant. It increases inflammation in the body, and then your body itself starts like increases anti-inflammatory processes. So if you get too much, you're probably going to be like creating too much of like a provocation. So it depends on, if you're eating a little bit of turmeric, the pepper is a good idea. If you're eating like more than like a quarter teaspoon, I would say it probably makes it worse. Yeah.
Is it the same with curcumin?
Yes.
What do you think about coconut oil? Is that good or not good?
I would say it's not good, because like it has some saturated fats. It's basically, there's no food on the planet that has more saturated fats than coconut oil. And it's true. It's medium chain, which is probably less harmful than long chain saturated fats that we find in beef. But we do not have any studies that show that it's not harmful. So we have to assume that it still has quite problematic effects. And we can see that like some of the studies where you've been giving people a high dose of coconut oil, it's definitely adversely affect their insulin resistance. You see that definitely becoming worse with high intake of coconut oils. When it comes to like really having good data on how it affects your serum cholesterol, we don't have it. So it might be significantly less harmful than the ones from beef, but it's until we have clear evidence that it doesn't affect it as harmfully, I would stay away from it. And also, it's like it's a waste of calories. It has no beneficial compounds. It has no dietary fiber. It has no phytochemicals, no vitamins, no minerals. So if you're eating like a tablespoon of coconut oil, that's like 150 calories worth, and you have 2,000 calories to eat every day. You want to get as many good compounds with all of your calories, and coconut oil is not a good source. Yeah.
Last question.
But aren't there studies that prove that coconut oil is good for the brain?
No, there is not. There are no studies. There is one doctor who has made like her mission to show that they can treat Alzheimer's, and reportedly she says she has quite amazing effects by adding a lot of coconut oil to see if it improves the cognitive abilities of people with dementia and Alzheimer's. But there's no actual science on it. So, and what we can see is like the more saturated fats you eat, we know that the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's goes up. So for me, it would make any sense.